Uh-oh. Okay, we'll start with this. Claressa Shields' latest gripe, her latest issue. To believe I can't beat Jake Paul is sexist and not to know boxing. The war continues between the American boxer Claressa Shields, a two-time Olympic champion, London 2012 and Rio 2016, and holder of the four main world boxing titles, the WBA, WBC, IBF, and WBO, simultaneously in two weight categories, and the YouTuber, actor, and also boxer, Jake Paul. I don't know if it's something that can happen, the fight, but I know I can beat Jake Paul, and the people who are against that are just sexist and don't know boxing. The most decorated boxer in history told USA Today Sports. Well, maybe it's because those people saw a guy smaller than Jake with less fights than Jake knock you on your ass. It's very strange to me that they think a YouTuber can beat a boxer who has 2 Olympic gold medals, multiple world titles, and who fought as a heavyweight. How many gold medals did Artur Amatovs have? How many world titles? How many did he have when he knocked you down, knocked you on your ass, and you ran for a knife? And this is a guy literally smaller than Jake Paul, much smaller guy who used to compete at 135 pounds. So what do you think a 200-pound Jake Paul's gonna do to you? Maybe it's not sexism. Maybe it's just common sense. He has no experience. They talk about power, but you have to have the skill to land the punch, adds Shields, 29, who is 15-0 as a professional with 3 knockouts. I find it very strange that they think a YouTuber can beat a boxer with 2 Olympic gold medals and several world titles. It all goes back to the Artur's Amatov sparring session, the one that got leaked by Artur. So do you think that the reason Claressa Shields is doing this is to fast-track herself to a payday that she cannot otherwise get in the divisions where she campaigns, barren divisions where there are no stars, for a circus fight with Jake? That's one way to look at it. But another way to look at it is she's going for the low-hanging fruit because she knows Jake likely won't respond. Jake won't entertain her, so she's free to get out there and humiliate him, emasculate him as much as she wants because she's a bully and a misandrist. That's another way to look at it. The feud between them began when Jake Paul called Shields a loser after her split decision loss in her mixed martial arts debut. "You can't call me a loser because you don't box better than me," Shields said at the time, "and you sure don't do MMA better than me. You don't do anything better than me." He makes money better than you do. That's inaccurate. The feud between them did not start when Jake called her a loser. Jake was responding to her. Before that, she was taking shots at him for knocking out Nate Robinson, a basketball player. It was in December of 2020 when Claressa Shields said she would beat the shit out of Jake Paul. She started this. So that several months later, in October of the following year, when she lost to Abigail Montez in the octagon, that's when Jake Paul responded. But he didn't start this. She did. All he did was reciprocate the energy that she gave him. And for what? For knocking out a basketball player? What business is that of yours? Claressa Shields stated, "The offer is always there if Jake Paul wants to fight me. I don't think he's that good a boxer. I'm never ever going to say or even feel like Jake Paul can beat me in a boxing match, because he can't." She says that if anybody thinks Jake Paul can beat her, it's gotta be because they're sexist. Oh, it's not because we saw a smaller man than Jake Paul put you on your ass. It's because we're all sexists. You know, that's not the first time that Claressa Shields used sexism as a smokescreen for her inadequacies. I remember right around the time that she left Showtime, that's what she was saying. In the thick of the pandemic, everybody was feeling the pinch, Showtime included, and they were going to cut her purse down from $300,000 to $150,000 for what was the Marie-Eve Dicaire fight. Initially, they wanted it to happen on Showtime. Claressa wanted it to be a pay-per-view. They told Claressa she just doesn't have a big enough following for that. And for that, she calls them sexist, calls boxing sexist. I remember a quote from Claressa from around that time where she said, "I feel like the more boxing championships I won, the more undefeated fighters I beat, the more divisions I conquered, everybody would see my work and think, duh, we should be paying her more than $1 million. We should be paying her $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, $5 million. This is clearly a woman that's out of touch with reality and has no understanding of how boxing works. Crying sexism because she can't get what she wants. It's no surprise that she's using that same smoke screen now when it comes to Jake Paul and anybody who might think that maybe this guy is a bit too big for you, because this is a grown man. As good as you are in your field, at some point, size matters. Especially when a guy with less size than him put you on your backside, and you don't want to acknowledge that. You'd rather tell yourself he was loading his gloves or there was something going on there. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like what Deontay Wilder said about Tyson Fury? See, this is an ego thing. It was an ego thing with Wilder like it's an ego thing with her. Going after Jake Paul, same deal. She thinks he's supposed to bow down to her. Kiss her ass. That's what she expects when she's been taking shots at this guy unprovoked. She started going after him. Jake Paul never said nothing about her, and she's the one that started it. So that if he were to finish it, he would fast become a social pariah. Because for all her talk, if he actually gave her what she wanted, he'd be the bad guy. It's better he doesn't entertain her, doesn't acknowledge her. He's making too much money. And that's what really burns her up, I think. That he doesn't acknowledge her. He doesn't have to. You're nobody to check in with and no one to bow down to. You're talking him down, but you need him more than he needs you. And you don't see any other women boxers doing this. Only Claressa. It's not a good thing. Men's boxing, Ben Shalom says, getting Conor Benn to understand he's not Anthony Joshua is the hardest part of the Chris Eubank Jr. negotiations, says promoter. Promoter Ben Shalom believes it could be a matter of time before a deal is finally struck to match Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn. Shalom, who at Boxer promotes Eubank Jr., said, "If I was a betting man, it will be done in the next week." I think we heard something similar last week. Ben's promoter, Eddie Hearn, had earlier in the week told Boxing Scene that a deal could be struck in the next few days, and while Hearn said the WBC welterweight champion Mario Barrios remains an option for Ben, Shalom says terms have been outlined for Eubank to take on WBA middleweight champion Erislandy Lara if they have to go in another direction. We've been hearing that for at least 2 to 3 weeks now. Just go in another direction. Do it! Both promoters have said negotiations have been difficult, but with a glitzy boxing ceremony for the ring in London on Saturday, an announcement could coincide with that event. Eubank and Benn were due to fight more than 2 years ago in a bout rooted in the rivalry of their famous fighting fathers. But after Benn failed tests for the drug clomiphene, the fight fell apart at the last minute, and a showpiece rivalry has become a far more personal feud, which has made negotiations far harder this time around. You know what it is, said Shalom. I've not been in this as long as the other promoters, and I remember doing Amir Khan versus Kell Brook, and I couldn't understand why the fight couldn't get made because I was thinking, you the fighters are effectively business partners. You can put on an event. It's going to make you generational money together, and all you have to do is agree on something. I always thought with Amir and Kel, why can't you just understand that you guys can make loads of money together? But the problem is, they couldn't stand being in the same room as each other, and there was a genuine hate, and that had built up over the years and years. There was a bitterness of Kel's family towards Amir, and all that history, and I think I kind of understood it. With Chris and Conor, I kind of thought from the outside, this is just a pantomime fight. But it's been really difficult because Conor's got an even bigger ego than Chris Eubank Jr. And I'm not sure how, and it's made it difficult. It has. Asked whether such an event would be screened by Sky Sports, who work with Eubank and Boxer, and DAZN, who have Hearn and Benn, Shalom nodded, I think that's the easy part. I think the hard part is getting the fighters to agree. And while Eubank is often said to be difficult when it comes to talks, this time Shalom claims that Benn has been the one hardest to work with on the deal. Simple question. Who stands a better chance of winning their alternative fight? Does Conor Benn stand a better chance of beating Mario Barrios than Chris stands of beating Erislandy Lara? Why? Bear with me. Who stands a better chance of winning? Does Conor stand a better chance of beating Mario, or does Chris stand a better chance of beating Lara? What difference does it make? Well, think about it. Let's say Chris Eubank Jr. walks away from Conor and he goes in there with Lara. He doesn't win, he loses. If you go in there with Lara and you lose, you're going to end up losing for less money than you could have made fighting Conor. And all you had to do was come to terms. Make a small sacrifice. Give a little to get a lot. Because you get a lot more fighting Conor than you get fighting Lara. Doesn't that same logic apply to Conor, though? That depends. Who stands a better chance of winning their fight? Does Conor stand a better chance of beating Mario, or does Chris stand a better chance of beating Lara? Asked what the most difficult part of discussions has been, Shalom said, getting Conor to understand that he's not Anthony Joshua. Chris Eubank Jr. is not Anthony Joshua either. I think getting Conor to be sensible. If this was Chris Eubank Jr. 3 or 4 years ago, probably when he was more hot-headed, he's actually taken a pretty reasonable, mature approach to this whole thing. I genuinely believe that. It's just about making sure the other side do as well. I think it will get done. Well, of course he's going to put the blame on Conor because he doesn't represent Conor. He represents Chris, who wants the lion's share of the pot. Why shouldn't Chris get it? Conor did test positive for a banned substance. Yes, so did Canelo Alvarez and Tyson Fury and a lot of other fighters. The reason Conor Benn probably wants more than what Chris is offering is because he's the naturally smaller fighter moving up to a weight where he's never fought before. Chris isn't just the more experienced fighter of the two going in, he's also the naturally bigger fighter, perhaps the stronger fighter. So for the sacrifice that Conor has to make this a reality, moving up in weight, he probably wants half. And you say that, well, you did screw the pooch the last time. The reason it didn't happen the last time, that was your fault. Or whatever you had going on your end. I get that. I do understand it, I do. But I'm just left wondering, what's your alternative? If your only alternative to Conor is an Erislandy Lara fight that you may or may not win for less money, far less than you stand to make with Conor. You want to gamble? You want to roll the dice? Well, I have heard that Chris Eubank Jr. is a gambling man, likes to sit at the poker tables alongside Ryan Garcia, so maybe he wants to gamble. And the virtue of that decision is only as good as the result, as the victory, if he can get it. I understand that Erislandy Lara is up there in age, but the ends have to justify the means. Chris Eubank Jr. has never actually competed at the same level as Erislandy Lara, and I don't know for sure that time has ravaged Lara enough that Chris is a shoo-in to win. Listen, I'm more intrigued by the Lara fight anyway. If things don't work out between Chris and Conor, I ain't gonna lose no sleep over it.
They say that David Morrell, we're talking about a Betco. They say he was tested the whole camp. David Morrell was not tested, and after the fight, they didn't do no test, no drug test, which is kind of odd to me, you know. But I'm not. I really don't care about that. Even if it was on steroids, I'd beat the shit out of him. But you know, if you're a dirty fighter, you will get exposed. You know what I mean? That's why they were making such a big fucking deal, and they didn't want to test. But dirty fighters will be exposed in this game. You know what I mean? And that's not good for the sport, and it's not good for people, you know, to use steroids. So, you know, I'm not going to let that shit slide.
What's the status of that right now, the testing? What is being used?
What?
What is the status of the testing right now? Like, what is being used?
We're being tested because I keep putting pressure on Benavidez, saying that we got to test. And it's supposed to be the
interim for WBC?
WBC and then WBA. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, but you know, at the end of the day, these are the high caliber fights that need testing. When I fought Caleb Plant, when I fought Demetrius Andre, we were testing 14 weeks out. You know what I mean? With this one, we barely started testing 9 weeks out. And it's not like I'm asking stuff that I didn't do myself. I mean, I've been tested more than VADA by anybody. I've been tested more than anybody. I mean, by VADA by anybody. You know what I mean? I've been tested over probably 40 times. So it's not like I'm telling them to do something I didn't do myself. You know what I mean? When I fought Caleb Plant, they wanted to test as soon as we signed the contract. So it's not like I'm asking them to do anything, you know, and then for them to act like, you know, we're making them do something that they're not supposed to do. You know, we're supposed to take VADA tests. You know, it's supposed to be clean boxing. Isn't that why VADA's in boxing?
Am I the only one who watched that entire video and thought that David looked like he was about to laugh? When he's going on about cleaning up the sport, cleaner sport, VADA, that's why they're here.
Why would he laugh?
Because he knows it's all bullshit. He's working with Memo Heredia. Wake up and smell the TRT. Approaching the subject of doping in the sport of boxing is just so bizarre now, because it's almost like everybody knows that everybody's doping, and maybe everybody is, which begs the question, then why do you want VADA testing? And I said it before, it's to handicap your opponent. It's to make sure you get to use your gear, but they don't get to use theirs, and if they do, there's a chance they'll get caught.
So if everybody's doping, why don't they just come out with it?
It's a liability issue. I mean, you see that Devin Haney just tried to sue Ryan Garcia because he tested positive for a banned substance. The saving grace for Ryan is he never copped to the rap. He never admitted that he took something, because if he did,
He's culpable.
and whatever damages Devin would have suffered as a result of that would have been on Ryan, because Devin never agreed to fight a fighter that was on something. So when you see all these fighters say the exact same thing, that they never knowingly took something, that's what that's for. It's a shield. Because if they all admitted to what they're doing and everybody knew about it and went ahead and had a boxing match anyway, one of these guys suffers permanent brain damage.
Whoever knew is liable.
Theoretically, they could be in a situation like that. And thus, we end up with a situation like this where it seems like everybody's doping, and it seems like everybody knows, they just never say it outright. At least not to the boxing media, and not to the fans.
They're all clean fighters until they're not. Oh, I think David Morrell is dirty. I think it's a possibility, but I think it's just as likely that David Benavidez is too.
So that would put them on an even playing field with each other. But that it's only your side harping about anti-doping testing communicates apprehensiveness, worry, nervousness.
You know what you're doing. So does he.
So can Sally Stravazak and get it on?
Won't somebody please think about the boxers?
He says he doesn't care if David Morrell is on steroids anyway, he'd still beat the shit out of him. Is that possible? Well, Josh Taylor some years ago did beat a then unbeaten Ryan Martin, who afterwards tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs, though you'd never know it from how he performed.
And you don't think Josh Taylor might have been on something?
Like I said, this is a very strange conversation to have, because in order to have it out in the open, you have to implicate everyone, even the fighters you like, and even the fighters that have never tested positive for anything. If you're talking about a landscape where everybody's on something, everybody means everybody.
So Josh Taylor's gear was better than Ryan's?
It's one way to look at it, but another way to look at it is, you don't all of a sudden start throwing a proper jab, executing a proper shift or a pivot because you took some steroids.
They can only do but so much.
And because it's a conversation that people don't often have out in the open, it's hard to quantify how much you can attribute to doping.
It'll remain a mystery.